While our tracker does keep tabs on a lot of data points, you'll always have information that is custom to your specific use case that will never be able to track by default. And that is where metadata comes in. By adding metadata fields to your user session, you can filter, plot, and do many things around it as if they were native data points collected by your tracker. In this video, I'm going to show you how easy it is to set it up and use that information once you have it in the platform. So let's go. All right, so for this example, I have the usual fake e-commerce site that I use for testing. And this time around, I want to keep track of 3 pieces of metadata that I don't have any other way of showing on my replays. So if I go to the configuration of my project and I go to the metadata section and select my e-commerce test, I will keep track of the plan of the user, the UTM source, meaning where is the traffic coming from, and finally the amount of items they have on the cart during the session. This is all going to be useful then for filtering and understanding the behavior of the users later on, even potentially bugs that may happen when users are in one of the many plans, for instance, or depending on the amount of items they have on the cart. The point here is that I have 3 items of metadata and I can add further here, simply adding the name and clicking on the add button. You cannot set metadata on the session by code if you don't configure it here first. So this is your first step in the process, right? So then what we're gonna do is we're gonna be using the setMetadata method, and you can call it anytime after you call the start method. You can even set the metadata at the time you call the start method, but as you're gonna see in our case, that is not really practical because we won't have all that information at that point. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna set the plan and the UTM source on the index of our site because that is the first thing that we know about the user. But then the number of items in the cart is gonna have to be set on the product sidebar component, which we're gonna look at in a minute. If you go to the code, as usual, this is the same Next.js project, and you're gonna be able to get the source code on the description of this video. And if you go through some of the tutorials in our tutorial section of documentation, you'll also find the examples around this same project. So I have created a tracker provider for this project, which essentially takes care of sharing the state and the instance of the tracker once we call the init tracker method. This is all to make it simple to be able to use the tracker from different pages on the site, on a complex site. So right now it's already configured to initiate the tracker, to start it, simply calling the start method, and also to log issues or events. I'm going to be adding a new method so that we can set the metadata through one of these functions and then let the tracker send that information as part of the session. And we're going to be using that here, as I mentioned, on the index page after we call the start tracking function. And finally, on the product sidebar, when we add an item to the cart, we are also going to keep track of the amount of items inside the cart, which we already do inside a state variable. So we're going to be reacting to changes on that. But first, let's go to the tracker provider and add the message type that we want to handle. And this is simply a key and a value. Both have to be strings, and this will not be converted by the tracker itself. So if you, as part of the value, send a number, for instance, that metadata will not be recorded. So you have to be sure that what you're sending is a string. So we're going to make sure of that right here. So we're going to reference the action, payload, and then the key, and then the action, payload, and the value. But we're just going to do this simple trick to make sure that this value is casted as a string every time, and then we'll return the state as usual. So then we'll add the function here. We're also going to collect setMetadata, and it's going to take 2 parameters, the key and the value, and it's going to dispatch a message of type set metadata, and the payload is going to be the key and the value. And that's it. That's all the modification we have to do to this particular tracker provider. Just keep in mind, however you have it architected on your site and on your application, you have to call the setMetadata method on the active tracker. So now we're going to start making use of this. So we'll go to the index, which is the easiest one. And here we want to capture the plan of the user and also to capture the UTM source attribute that could potentially be coming. So to keep it simple, I'm just going to get the setMetadata function out of here, and then I'm going to call it right after the start tracking function. And I'm going to call the first one plan, as we already saw, and it's going to get plan function. And then I'm also going to call it for UTM source, and I'm going to get it from UTM source. Now, in your application, you can do this however you want, and depending on your business logic. In my case, I'm just going to return random values here to control the output so you can see the example better. I have both functions ready here. So for the plan, we're gonna be either going with free, pro, or enterprise, simply returning randomly one of these values. And then for the UTM source, I'm going to go with Google, Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit. Again, returning one of these randomly every time we call the function. And that's it. Now we are recording the plan and UTM source. And so we have to go now to the product sidebar component. And as I mentioned before, we're going to be reacting to changes on the product's in-car state variable. So for that, we'll just simply define a use effect hook, and we'll say we have to first, as always, get the setMetadata function, and then call it here and say it's called items in cart, or underscore from that, and we'll use the products in cart state variable, and we'll react to changes in that one. So we'll add it to the array here, and that's it. The use effect hook will now call this function whenever we add products to the cart, and the setMetadata function will update the items in cart, as you can see in a minute. So now all we have to do is to test our site. We'll simply add a few items to the cart, and then we'll just close it and wait a few minutes as usual for the sessions to appear. Now that we have the replay here, you can see that you already see part of the metadata here as part of the list. If you go into the session, you'll see that your metadata is shown here. We are dealing with a user with a pro plan, and we're also dealing with traffic coming from Twitter. And you can see here that the items in the cart ended up being 3. So that's fine. We can see that as part of the session, but what else can we do with the metadata? And that is when this information comes useful, because now that you are able to categorize your users based on it, you can also search sessions based on it. If you go to the OmniSearch part here, you'll find that there is a custom filter here called Sessions and User Metadata, where you can already filter by whatever metadata fields you created. So if we want to look at sessions from enterprise users, you can simply filter by plan and say and it will automatically autocomplete the value for us. And you can see here I have already 3 sessions for enterprise users. I can also filter for pro as before and add a new step and say, well, and I also want to make sure that these are users that are coming from Twitter, for example. So I'll let the autocomplete work, and I see that I have 3 sessions for pro users coming from Twitter. So I can filter and categorize my sessions a lot faster. Wherever you are able to filter using the Omni search bar, then you'll be able to also use these filters. You can do so on dashboards with custom metrics. You can create one based on search parameters and using the same. So let's say you're creating a dashboard specifically for pro users. So you can filter the sessions that will be affected on this particular metric by the plan metadata field. And then you can add a new step saying, I don't know, that there were custom events sent. So since we know that we are already sending a custom event when we add a new product to the cart, we can create, for instance, a filter and say that we want pro users that added products to their cart. So we can name this metric cart usage for pro users, for instance, and then simply create the metric. And then you'll be able to use it wherever you want, and make sure that you're always filtering by the metadata. And remember, so wherever the Omni search is present, you'll be able to filter your sessions by this metadata to narrow down whatever you're looking for. And that's it for this video. Remember, you first have to set the metadata fields on the platform. You have to remember that all values must be strings. If they're not strings, the tracker will ignore them and the data will not be saved. You can either send metadata through the setMetadata method on the tracker that you can execute anywhere in your code as long as it executes after you call the start method, or if you have the data available when you call the start method, you can also use that with the parameters to set the metadata. You can see more information about that on our documentation. If you happen to have any issues setting or sending metadata, reach out to us on our Slack channel with a link in the description, and we'll be more than happy to give you a hand. Also, if you found this video useful, make sure to subscribe to our channel to be notified the next time we release a new tutorial. And that's it. Thanks for watching, and catch you on the next one.